Welcome to the Stay or Go podcast, where we're changing the dialogue around divorce so that no woman ever stays in her marriage out of fear. Get ready to dispel myths, learn life-changing tools, and build a solid foundation in yourself from which to make your decision. And now your host, me, Britta Jo. Hello. Welcome back this week. Now, before we dive into, as you guys can tell, hopefully from the title of this episode, what I feel is going to be a very deep and incredibly insightful episode, I want to do something a little bit different right off the bat. And for those of you that have been following along with my journey recently, where I am at here in summer of 2026, you will know that about a month ago, I shared on the podcast about a very messy internal loop I have been going through the last 8 months, where I was internalizing a lot of my business stress, thinking I just needed to surrender more instead of looking clearly at the numbers around my previous move to Substack. On that episode, I shared that after finally looking at those numbers and realizing some just important things when you're running a business, I made the decision to bring the podcast out from behind the paywall. So many of you have been enjoying that it is once again wide open and free. And also in the midst of sharing that, post-sharing that episode, some incredible women in my Stay or Go community. You know who you are, loves. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is a moment for me to just, they reached out to me and wrapped their arms around me. Fellow business savvy entrepreneurs that just had ideas for me. And they've really been helping me look at my numbers and the business side of this whole beautiful podcast community offers that I do, and to really see it with supportive, fresh eyes. And one of the biggest recommendations that one of them gave me this last week was actually very simple, but I was like, ooh, she's so right. And she said, B, you got to stop putting your offers, which for me are so heart-led, my community, my 90-minute sessions, working with me on a deep dive coaching container. You've got to stop putting those at the end of your episodes where people are going to miss them. I want you to bring them to the front. So here I am doing that today. And it's very important to me in making that shift, in allowing myself to place my work, the opportunities to work with me personally at the front of my podcasts. To have it not come across like, I think that's what so many of us as women struggle with. We don't want it to feel like a sales pitch. But she really helped me realize instead, and I've spent some time with it myself, it's really a big piece of what this episode's going to talk about as well, is realizing that actually what I have to offer is quite literally the lifeline that so many of you are drowning without. And so in some ways, it is unfair of me to, in my own shy way, leave that at the end of my episodes. So I'm going to be trying to put those more at the beginning. And to start with this episode, I actually recently did something for the first time in the Stay or Go community. I was able to offer 3 summer scholarships for women in the community to get a fully paid 50-minute session with me where they could just drop in one-on-one. And as I was reading through the recent applications of the women who wrote in, I was once again just like, there it is. I saw this pattern that I'm going to talk about in depth on this episode emerge again within these applications. And it really drove home for me just how much of those of you that are drawn to this podcast and to my work, for many of you, the root of what you're thinking is an issue with trusting yourself is not just that. It is not just standard marital distress. It actually ties back into a much more deep-seated and painful insecure attachment wound. And as I read those applications, I felt deeply for my women that this is what they're struggling with underneath all of it, because hopefully, as many of you, if those of you that are listening to the podcast know, I'm very transparent that this is the same wound that I carry. And I know intimately how this attachment wound weaves into every single corner of your life. I look back at my marriage and I see how it weaved into everything there. And it really complicated the process of considering divorce for me. And I see this for so many women that have it as well. And I really want you to hear me on this piece. The wound of insecure attachment does not magically disappear just because you sign divorce papers. Babes, I have been divorced for 6 years now. And as you will hear in a few minutes when we get into the episode, my own insecure attachment and fear around trusting myself really came roaring back in a terrifying way just a couple weeks ago. But for those of us with severe insecure attachment like me, trying to heal while you are trapped in a marriage that is constantly triggering you and playing on your childhood trauma, believing that you will be able to heal in that, in my opinion, is an absolute fantasy. I speak that from my own experiences and from 6 years now of watching and coaching women trying to do exactly that. And I'm realizing that for many of us with insecure attachment wounds, our marriage may be the very thing that is preventing us from ever developing a secure attachment to ourselves. Now, that is why, in alignment with the goals that I've been setting with my business friends, I am bringing my deep dive one-on-one coaching package back to the forefront here on the podcast. And for the temporary moment of time that we're in right now, I am going to be lowering my price on that by 16%. And although many of you may be like, wait, deep dive coaching container, what is this? You know, on the podcast, I talk a lot about the Stay or Go community. I've talked a lot about my 90-minute get unstuck and empowered sessions. I've really let the deep dive coaching kind of fall to the background, even though that has been the case. Let me be clear that when it comes to my babes in the insecure attachment space, this offering is where the truly acute, life-altering work related to attachment begins. This is the work that for my women, you know, writing in, applying to be able to do a 50-minute session with me, I was like, listening to what they're wanting, I was like, this is the work that you need deep, one-on-one, consistent work around. Now, in mentioning work related to attachment, right, that in this deep dive coaching container with me, we do work related to attachment, I do want to be incredibly clear and grounded about what the work in that container is that I actually do. Because healing an insecure attachment wound and building true secure attachment is a lifelong process, babes. Okay? It takes time. That is what I have learned from my own experiences. I definitely this year have been realizing it. Building that is the deep, slow work that I am personally doing right now alongside my therapist and my partner, Joe. So my goal when I coach with one of my one-on-one clients in the deep dive container, for those 3 to sometimes 6 months that we work together, it is not to magically cure your attachment style. I wish I could do that, but I can't. And if anybody else is promising you that they can do that in a one session or in a couple of months, they can't. Rather, the power of what we do in that container is about giving you just enough trust, just enough self-connection, and just enough belief in yourself to finally make this terrifying decision of whether to stay or go. And for my listeners with insecure attachment babes, that decision is life-saving. Because like I said earlier, if you fall in this group, which if you're going, am I in this group? Am I not in this group? I don't know, Britta. That's what this episode that we're going to dive into is going to help you with. But if you fall in that group, trying to heal into secure attachment while you are trapped within a marriage that is constantly triggering and playing on your insecure attachment from childhood, that is a fantasy. I have not seen it happen yet. It gets me so, I'm just so grateful to be saying it so clearly on this episode here on the podcast. I don't think I've ever been clearer about this with you all, but it is something that I have seen over and over, that once you have insecure attachment within the marriage, if the marriage is the very thing that keeps retriggering that, believing it will just magically one day heal is a fantasy. Thus, for those of you that feel like you are in what I would describe as like a burning building of a marriage, your nervous system is always on fire, what I do in my one-on-one coaching, in the deep dive work, I am there to give you the structural scaffolding, the safety, and the momentum that you need to figure out how to get out of that building, either with your partner or without, right? Because we go into this work, it's not about just going. Sometimes it's stay. But the point is, we're getting both of you out of that building, or you are leaving that building, so you can actually begin to build the life you deserve and want on solid ground. In that work we do together, it's like we're building the launch pad. That's what I mean. It's like I can't give you secure attachment, but I can give you the launch pad that is going to move you into the space where you will have, the way I love thinking about it is our work is giving you the strong enough wings so that you're able to make the choice and move forward into the exact environment, community, and support systems that you're going to need in the future to do the deeper, secure attachment work in the years ahead. I know how to do that work because I had to build that launch pad for myself. This is the exact work I had to do, and I know it works because for me, the launch pad out and the 6 years I've had since then is exactly how I have been healing into secure attachment with myself. And it is exactly the kind of launch pad that I want to help those of you struggling in the burning buildings to build as well. So if while you are listening to this episode, you realize that you too are in this insecure attachment camp with me, and you need someone to walk with you step by step through the quicksand that you feel like you are in right now, considering divorce, I want to personally invite you to go look at the updated details of my deep dive coaching container. It'll be a first link. If you scroll down, first link at the top that you'll see below. And I want you to sign up for an alignment and clarity call. You have to do that first to see if we are a fit for this deep work. All the details will be waiting for you over there on my website. Yay! Okay. I did it. With that shared, and honestly, so close to my heart, especially as we get through the rest of this episode, you guys will understand why putting that offer back up to the front is so close to my heart. I want to dive into this episode, right, that I've entitled with a question that I think many of you have had on your hearts. Why can't I trust myself when it comes to divorce? Why can't I get myself to make these decisions and move forward? Let's drop right in with what happened for me a couple of weeks ago. So, as I was mentioning at the beginning of this episode, talking about the whole Substack experience, right, that I've just gone through, and ultimately sharing it here on the podcast and being able to pivot. As much as I thought like the hardest part of that was going to be sharing it on the podcast, the realization of it, and then making the pivot, I actually found in the weeks post that, I started to have this cascade of just CPTSD coming up in my body. As I started to kind of notice it, I was tracking it enough to realize, ooh, I think some of this is being set off by admitting a mistake, so publicly, like on my podcast. Hey guys, I had this thing that I thought was going to work really well. It didn't work out. Now we're changing. Sounds so simple, right? And honestly, guys, I was getting so much support, great feedback from others. It's not like anything in my current reality was negative, but I was tracking my body is really freaking out and it's not matching the current environment. And that led me to think back to my childhood. And I started thinking specifically about that word of like a mistake. And I was like, ooh, wow. Actually, when I think back to my childhood, mistakes were not okay growing up. Like really, in my opinion, not okay in Mormonism, the way Mormonism was taught me, like you want to avoid mistakes at all costs. Definitely not okay in my home life. I thought back on like, okay, when did I make mistakes when I was younger? And I noticed, oh, wow, when I made mistakes, my mother would come down hard on me. A lot of emotional shaming. There was really no room for error. Ergo, something like this, this moment of making a mistake, having to shift, it being very public, what does it do but set off all of these emotional flashbacks for me? So that was happening. And then it also was coupled with my kiddos returning from being away on vacation. And I'm also realizing that one of my sons, who is in middle school and he's going through a lot of his own individuation right now, y'all, my kids individuating, it also happened with my oldest son. It is like such a minefield for my CPTSD because it's such a they're rejecting you to feel empowered and to kind of go off on their own. Meanwhile, my childhood brain and my insecure attachment is like, I literally want to die. This is so painful. So with this kind of shitstorm brewing, by the time I made it in to see my therapist on Thursday, I sat down on her couch and I went in thinking that I'd already cried enough that day. Like I was like, okay, good. We processed a lot of this. We probably won't have anything to talk about. No, I don't even get a word out. As soon as I hit her couch, I went into a full-blown stutter, covering my face, cannot speak, crying. It was honestly the most raw, real, vulnerable, unmanaged emotional release I've ever had with my therapist, which I actually take now as a good sign. She was helping me see this is the work. This is part of healing into secure attachment, is being able to be fully seen in my pain by those that I trust. And I basically couldn't speak for about 15 minutes. I just had to sit there with my hands over my face in silence, just regulating to her voice and to the room and just letting it come through. And as I shared with her, once I could start speaking again, all of the painful and overwhelming feelings this week that had been coming up, I'd been identifying some of them. I was like, whoa, I can tell there's a lot of sadness here. I'm experiencing a lot of fear and I'm experiencing a lot of self-disgust with this whole, all kind of circling around this idea of making a mistake. As I began to share that with her, she gently was reflecting back to me how difficult this is, not making it oh, you're overreacting or this isn't bad. She was just like, yeah, babe. Yeah, I see you. And ultimately directed me to this book that she has started reading called Mother Hunger by Kelly McDaniel. And so, of course, I mean, as always, guys, sometimes when I have this big of a emotional reaction post, I definitely thought leaving my marriage that like 6 years out, this was not going to be a thing, like we were going to just trend upwards. And so when moments like this show up, it's very, very humbling and vulnerable for me. And so when she mentioned like, hey, I think this is actually rooted in it, contrary to your brain saying something is going terribly wrong and oh my gosh, it's like we're going in the opposite direction. Actually, this is exactly where we want to be. It means the grief and the pain of the insecure attachment from your childhood's actually coming up. And we need you to have more framework around it. We need you to have the intellectual understanding of what's happening to you. And I think this book will do it. So I run out immediately after my session with her. Thankfully that session, there was really nothing that we could fix in the external world besides just realizing, oh, there is a root to this and we're going to do this work together. Go get this book. You'll understand more about it. So I went straight over to my local Barnes & Noble and immediately got the book. So the book is called Mother Hunger. And the subtitle is How Adult Daughters Can Understand and Heal from Lost Nurturance, Protection, and Guidance. And the author again is Kelly McDaniel. And it's really, just so you guys know, this book is the impetus behind this whole episode. But first, just have to give a little disclaimer before you run out and buy it. I know I have some of my listeners who love buying every book I recommend. I do want to be clear with this book. So I am only through half of it at the moment. And in full disclosure, the first half is a lot to let land. Honestly, it's been difficult even for me to read it. And not like I have to constantly be catching my brain wanting to make me feel bad about how I haven't shown up for my kids in the ways that I now know more about, from this book. I'm like, oh, wow, those first 3 years of attachment with your child are really super important. Wish somebody had told me that. So if you are one of my listeners that struggles with mom shame, I would not do this book right now. And even though mother work is super important, honestly, I would say what I've seen is for some of us, it's really difficult to try and do deep attachment work at the same time as considering divorce. Now, when I look back, I look back at what my therapist was doing right before I got divorced, and I would say we were doing a lot of attachment work, but we were doing that before I moved into the process of considering divorce. I was just focused on me, my relationship with my mother, and I'd really put things with my marriage on hold. By the time I moved into the process of okay, I'm getting divorced. Now we're moving through the tunnel of divorce, the 8 months of going through the divorce. That was not the time to be digging up my attachment wounds and really reading and digesting my pain with my mother. It's just kind of too much for your nervous system. So know where you're at in the process. If you are in the middle of we are in the thick of it, I would not recommend going out and buying this book at the moment. Okay. That's in fact why I did this episode, because I was I don't know if I would have my listeners necessarily go dive into this book right now. It's definitely a resource that I am everybody needs to read this at some point. But for right now, this episode is hopefully going to bring you enough of the points to really give you some of the juicy bits. And then of course, once I get into the second half and I get to learn more about how you actually heal through it, maybe I'll be able to bring some of that in the future. But I couldn't wait to bring some of the important connections that were just deepening for me as I was reading this book. And as I was going through seeing this week just how deep my own mother hunger is, which by the way, if I haven't made it clear already, mother hunger is just Kelly McDaniel's word for insecure attachment. And I love it. Sometimes when we hear the word insecure attachment, it like sterilizes it so much that it doesn't, like the words don't speak to what it actually feels like. The words mother hunger actually resonate so much more deeply for me with what this viscerally feels like, and have made it much more clear for me that this truly is something that was not ever going to magically go away with my divorce 6 years ago. But at the same time, I can see clearly now was not something that I could be working on and healing within the container of my marriage. And that piece is so big for so many of you, and something I've really wanted to dive in and talk about on the podcast. So I'm very excited that this book is providing the framework to dive into that. So in this episode, I want to dive into 6 points from the book that have just, they're the ones, they're not the like 6 points she outlines. They're just the 6 points that as I was reading that have just landed for me really hard straight out of the gate. And I will say for those of you that might be listening to this episode, if you have never heard of attachment styles, if you are like, wait a second, what even is insecure attachment? Highly recommend pausing this episode, go back to episode 12. I mean, way back at the beginning of this podcast, the birth of this podcast, I was talking about attachment styles. And yes, I knew back then, like I was like, oh, these are important, but whoa, have I learned in the 2+ years since I released that episode, and this book's driving it home even more, that attachment styles are absolutely massive. You have to understand them. Anybody right now, if you are like, I am considering divorce and you don't understand your attachment style, this is foreign to you, I would say, pause, like go listen to episode 12, listen to the rest of this episode, and really understand that this is the root that causes so many of the symptoms that you're experiencing. So I want to hit on these 6 different points, and then also later on in the episode, share some powerful examples I've been seeing lately of women in my community who are illustrating this work. That's why while I've been reading it and then watching it in my women applying in the community or my women on coaching calls, I'm like, there it is. There it is. I see it. And my hope with this episode is that for those of you that are my listeners who may already know that you have an insecure attachment style, or maybe you realize you have it while listening to this episode, that if you fall in that camp, that this episode can hopefully save you some of the painful confusion and heartbreak of not knowing what this is and grappling with it. And I'm watching a woman in my community right now who she's been like separated for almost 10 months leading up to, an eventual divorce. And this is coming up now. And she's like, whoa, I made choices that felt good. Why am I so unhappy? Why am I so dysregulated? Right? Like me on my therapist's couch 2 weeks ago, like, why am I absolutely losing my shit in the life that I picked? I want to save you all some of that confusion and heartbreak and ultimately the time that gets wasted when you don't realize that this is a huge piece and impacts a lot of what you're going to actually need, both in the process of considering divorce and then absolutely going forward. So let's dive into those 6 points. The first one that I wanted to start off with is really just the point of diving in together into what is mother hunger in the way that Kelly McDaniel describes it. So I've already told you that, mother hunger is just her word for insecure attachment, but I loved this definition of it. So let me read this part of the book to you. She says, if you are reading this book, it's likely that sometimes you feel crazy, ashamed, or broken, but you aren't. Mother hunger is deeply misunderstood, and people who don't have mother hunger simply can't relate to what it feels like. This, of course, leaves us feeling alone with all our confusing emotions and behaviors. In 2008, I used prevailing clinical language to describe mother hunger as an attachment disorder. I regret this terminology because mother hunger isn't a disorder. It's an injury. a heartbreak that forms from inadequate maternal nurturance, protection, or guidance in early development. Injury aptly describes mother hunger because living with it hurts all the time. It's like grief, complicated grief that comes from carrying an unacknowledged, invisible burden all by yourself. As a child, if essential elements of maternal nurturance and protection were missing, you didn't stop loving your mother. You simply didn't learn to love yourself. This is the essence of mother hunger. Mother hunger is a heartbreak that touches everything in your world, particularly your relationships with others and your own sense of worth. I feel like you all just landed with me in the episode. I feel like up until that moment, we were all just kind of like, vibing in the like pre-intro, but here we are now. Do you guys understand why we're going to do this episode together? Yeah, there it is, my loves. That moment when I read that in the book, I was like, oh, this woman sees me. She understands me. Yep, she's talking about something that I understand acutely and struggle having language for. Now, that part right there where she says, if essential elements of maternal nurturance and protection were missing, you didn't stop loving your mother. You simply didn't learn to love yourself. Can we all just boom, mind blown? That is the hugest piece right there. And I think that's also why it's so confusing, because I know I grew up absolutely loving my mother. But looking back now, oh yeah, I did not learn to love myself though. And I'm learning through this book how it all traces back to that lack of those essential elements of maternal nurturance and protection that we're missing. Now, when you guys are coming to me and you're like, Britta, why can't I trust myself? Y'all, when we don't love ourselves, it is so difficult to trust ourselves, right? Are you going to trust somebody that you don't love or respect or think well of? That's the connection link. That's why this episode is titled the way it is, because the heart of why you don't trust yourself is going to tie back into this core wound that ultimately led to you as a child not learning how to love yourself. And if you don't love yourself, it's very difficult to trust yourself. I also love that in that section, she describes it as a heartbreak that touches everything in your world, and particularly your relationships with others and your own sense of self-worth. This piece epitomizes, right, what so many of you may be dancing around and not even knowing it in the process of considering divorce. If this wound impacts your relationships with others and your sense of self-worth, that's a really important thing to know, right, about yourself if you're in the process. And I want to say too, to all my listeners that are, maybe you've made the decision, maybe you're even staying in your marriage, maybe you've decided to go. Regardless, if you have mother hunger going forward, it is going to be something that you want to be understanding and healing with and working with, or it's going to continue to impact relationships with others and how you feel when it comes to self-worth. Second point, and I kind of already brushed against this briefly, but I really want to drive it home here. As I said prior, in attachment theory language, mother hunger is just a way to rename insecure attachment. And for those of you that have not listened or refresh on insecure attachment, remember that insecure attachment has those three categories of anxious, avoidant, and disorganized attachment. So sometimes it helps me too when I'm reading the word mother hunger to remind myself, like, oh, this is my disorganized attachment. It's just another name for that. Point 3, at least 40 to 50% of the population has an insecure attachment style. Now, I may very well have seen this statistic back when I was reading the Attached book and with episode 12, but when I read it in the book recently, in the Mother Hunger book, I was like, wait, what? I was shocked to realize that about half of us have insecure attachment. And honestly, you guys, I was like, okay, I'm not alone, right? I mean, it also rang very true for me because I thought this is probably why many of you relate to what I share, because looking back over the podcasts and my own growth and what I've shared here, I know that a lot of it is my work with insecure attachment. And it goes far deeper. You know, the stuff I'm talking about goes far deeper than I'm unhappy in my marriage. It strikes at the very marrow of what Kelly McDaniel's mother hunger idea is illustrating. Right? For a lot of us, when she says people who don't have mother hunger like do not get this, yeah, I totally understand how people with secure attachment do not know what it feels like to feel this way. And yet clients that I have coached that have insecure attachment, when they tell me, I'm like, yep, I see you. I get it. Now, I want to pause here before I go on to the other 3 points and just say, just for my babes, there might be some of you, I just had this intuitive feeling that there might be some of you while listening to this episode that might be feeling uneasy thinking about your mother not showing up for you, or maybe, even the words of like having a mother hunger. You may not be able to relate to those words just yet. And I just want you to just hold this all gently, because way back when I first started doing this work, when I was first in therapy, like 8, 9 years ago, I too really could not admit hardly any of the ways that my mother had neglected me. I couldn't. My allegiance to her, that's that part of like, your love for your mother doesn't go away. Your love for yourself is what gets impacted. And boy, was that the case. I had full allegiance to my mother. I believed we had this amazing relationship. And yet what was showing up in my life was depression and suicidal ideation and like, okay, what's going on here, right? So it's super helpful, I find, if you're first coming to this work where you're starting to admit like, okay, there might have been nurturance that was missing, things I needed in my childhood that's missing. There may have been, because the facts of what we're seeing right now is I'm struggling with all of these symptoms, and these symptoms can be tracked back to insecure attachment. I may have a very idealized view of my childhood. What can help us in this kind of vulnerable, messy space of starting to go, okay, maybe there were things that went down that weren't as supportive as I thought. I find it's very helpful to remember that often why our own mothers were unable to show up for us in these crucial ways of nurturing us in ways that would allow us to love ourselves is because of what? Their own trauma and their own neglect from their mothers, going all the way back through the generations. And ultimately, as I hope many of you will be able to be like yelling right now that have listened to the most recent episodes, ultimately stemming from patriarchal and misogynistic cultures that force women to prioritize and center men over themselves and their daughters. I feel like that just helps all of us go, okay, in acknowledging the wounds, we don't have to You know, we don't necessarily have to villainize our mothers, although I did have to go through a huge process with that, especially with a narcissistically abusive mother. That was a huge part of my journey. And I'm very here for, in the CPTSD book, Pete Walker talks about like healthy angering. So if that's your route, definitely go dig into that book. But just realizing we can still acknowledge that wounds happened. And I just want you to really keep remembering as we're talking about this whole episode that those wounds, contrary to causing you to not love your mother, the impact is that they cause you to learn to not love yourself. And we may want to, our training, our programming may make us want to hang on to that idealized view of our mothers. But I have seen so clearly how the cost of hanging on to that fantasy and the idealized vision and kind of like, my childhood was fine. Yeah, I'm like struggling with addictions and suicidal ideation and have all these CPTSD symptoms, but like my mom did the best she could. When we dismiss it that way to preserve the relationship with our mother, the cost is the disconnection from ourselves because we don't allow ourselves to fully grieve and reckon with, and we have to keep silencing and disconnecting from those internal parts that actually were hurt and neglected by her. So that's a very important piece for any of my babes that might be coming to this episode like early on in the acknowledgement of childhood wounds, especially with our mothers. Point 4. Attachment injuries become the foundation of future thinking and feeling. So, another quote I'm going to read that's going to break this one down for us. Kelly McDaniel says, "Mother hunger comes from events that may happen before language is formed, when a mother's care is your entire world. To get an idea of this, think of your biological mother as your first home. Her body, embrace, and emotions were your first environment, inseparable from your newborn body and emotions. For an infant, a mother's body is the natural habitat that regulates breathing, body temperature, sleep rhythms, and heart rate. Nature's design is for her to stay close so that your development goes smoothly. When a baby is alerted to a need by hunger, pain, or separation, nature's design is for her mother's soothing touch and sound to meet that need. Over time, with maternal responsiveness, positive interactions strengthen the developmental reward systems that help us trust others and manage stress. In this way, the daily interactions and nighttime comfort between mother and child, quote, are the neurobiological glue for all future healthy relationships. If, for whatever reason, your mother was not ready to be a mother, or if, like many, she was unaware of the concepts we will cover here, science suggests that you may carry the ambivalence, fear, or anger that she felt. Her responsiveness to your needs and her physical presence may have been inadequate. Although you have no clear memory of her early care, your body does. When essential elements of maternal care were absent, the result is an attachment injury that becomes the foundation of future thinking and feeling. Okay, I want you to pause here with that insight and really think back to who your mother was and what she was going through when she was pregnant with you, all the way through the next 3 years of your life after you were born. You can even pause this episode and really give yourself a second to like, okay, what year was that? How old would my mother have been? Where was she living? How old was she when she got pregnant with me? What are the family dynamics that I know she came from? What were things like economically for her at the time? How long had she been married? Was she married? Right? Give yourself a second to think back to your mother during that period of time. I know when I think back to my mom, the word I wrote down was like fuck. I was like, oh, dang, very young, only knew my dad for 3 months, rough first marriage, rough first year of their marriage because they didn't know each other well. Then she's pregnant with me, living in like a community college dorms in this tiny little town where there was like nobody she knew, a lot of under-resourcing in her life. And then, my first 3 years, she has me and then like immediately has my brother 2 years later and just went on to keep having kids pretty right after that for the first 4 of us. So that's a really helpful moment to pause and look back on that. Point 5, implicit memory. And stay with me on this quote, y'all. This is the last quote I have for you, but this one is a goodie. And especially because as I started learning about implicit memory, I was geeking out so hard. So, quote, "Your body knows the story of how early love felt. For this reason, much of the focus of this book will be on the first 2 years of life, before memory is explicit and cognition is available, when, quote, thinking isn't thinking at all. It's a feeling. Infant and toddler, quote, thought is a body-based emotional experience informed by the early environment. Since the thinking brain, or neocortex, develops sometime after age 3, when children start asking why a lot, logic isn't available before then. We can think of it like this. For a baby, feelings are facts. If baby is afraid or hungry and a sensitive adult responds to her cues, all is well. If no one is there, all is not well. Separation from a familiar caregiver means danger. Emotions are stored in the body and create a certain reality or belief system. The world is safe, and so am I. Or, the world is scary, and I'm all alone. Stored sensations like these become implicit memories. Unlike explicit memory that is conscious and has language, implicit memory is unconscious and has none. Implicit memories reside deep within the limbic structures of the brain, silently whispering messages of safety or danger to the rest of the body. Early experiences impact the developing central nervous system through feelings and bodily sensations. In this way, quote, remembering things from your early years is more of a sensation than a conscious awareness. Feelings create implicit memory from pre-verbal, pre-cognitive moments with and without our mother. Early emotional experiences literally become embedded in the architecture of our brain. When an infant's vulnerable nervous system picks up that things are not safe, as with early maternal separations or insensitive care, nature calls forth a fear response. Fear releases cortisol and adrenaline, which can be toxic for developing brain regions. When fear isn't soothed and happens regularly, a baby stores the fearful sensations in her cells, building a body and brain poised for danger, hungry for love, but wary of human connection. Understanding implicit memory explains why sometimes we have no idea why we act the way we do. We can't see the distress living in our body. Early memories are dissociated from consciousness, but they direct our moods and our health throughout life. Okay, many of you may not have had experiences yet with that exactly, where she's like remembering things from your early years is more of a sensation than a conscious awareness. But in the last 2 to 3 years, really as I've had repressed memories come back, as I've started doing brain spotting and working with my therapist, I can verify that this is how a lot of this deeper work comes up. It comes up as these fragments or memories or feelings that oftentimes I just can't explain or really give a clear memory with. And it blew me away when I was like reading this and I was like, oh my gosh, the first 2 years, I have no memories from my first 2 years. Any of the memories I think I have come from pictures in photo books, of like, oh, I can't even tell if they're actual memories as much as they are just looking at pictures. And I think what I loved most in this piece and why I read all of that to you is because, babes, if this is what we experienced in our first 2 years, this is what you're working with. When she talks about those chemicals as a baby being stored, they're forming your brain. They are programming it to believe the world is scary and I am all alone. That's an operating system that goes far deeper than your marriage. That's an operating system that you may be experiencing regularly in your marriage and not realizing is underpinning so much of it. And that's the piece that women, once they leave and don't work on this, get so wrecked over, right? I thought I was going to leave the marriage and I thought this piece, the mother hunger piece, the fear, the not feeling safe in my own body was going to change. Nope, babes. That is the work we are signing up for. Some of us will be able to do that work in our marriages. Some of you will be like me, where I had to leave my marriage to be able to do that work. Now, finally, the 6th point. And this one too, I was like, how I was reading it and I was like, how did I not know this? I should know this. But she said, quote, "The largest predictor of human health and happiness isn't wealth or status. It is the number of loving relationships we have." Okay, I can feel some of you being like, wait, what? So some of you are having the same reaction that I had. And if you are, and even if you're not, maybe you're like, yes, I knew that. If you did, wow, go you. I think I maybe knew it subconsciously, but I don't know if I'd like seen it written out, oh, we've proved this. It's not status. It's not wealth. It's not all the things that we've been sold by our consumeristic societies that will make you happy. It's literally the number of loving relationships that you have. So I want you to pause here too and take a second, my babes, and check in with how many, and I want to be clear here, with truly loving relationships. Okay, not just, this is the tricky part, right? Of saying oh, it's a loving relationship. No, you know for yourself which relationships are actually genuinely loving. So that's why I'm saying I want you to check in on how many are truly loving relationships that you have in your life right now. If you have to pause it, pause it. Give yourself some time to let this land. Now, if I think back to when I was married, and I especially can contrast it now because I know now what a loving relationship looks like, I would have to say that back when I was married, I had 2. And I want you guys to realize, back when I was married, I still was close with my parents, my family. I was in a huge church community. On the surface, you would think so many loving relationships. Looking back now, though, yeah, I had 2. It was my therapist and my best friend at the time. But that was it. That was the level of truly loving relationships that I had in my life. It blows my mind now to look at, having my therapist, having Quinn, having Joe, having so many women that I've met through the community, women that I've coached one-on-one that I've now become great friends with. I have so many more loving relationships now than I did then. Even though on the external, right? I mean, I don't have contact with really a lot of my siblings I'm not close with anymore. It's just too painful. and my mother's dead and my dad's in prison. So I don't have any of the family connections. And yet, isn't that crazy? I, by the number of loving relationships I currently have, actually have a greater predictor of human health and happiness in my life. That's such a testament to me of just how much like understanding this work and moving towards what's best for you is so powerful. Now, in the book, Kelly McDaniel goes on to talk about 3 essential elements of mothering. The first one she talks about is nurturance, and this was fascinating. Some of the parts that like blew my mind is she said, how we use food and how we use sex are linked back to this. There's one section in the book where she asks you this question, like, how do you, what do you do with food in these ways? And then the next one she's like, is like, what do you do with sex in these ways? And then I did both of them and I was like, oh my God, they're related. I was like, I did not know that I had like stuff related to food that was also related to sex, and that it all links back ultimately to the nurturance that I received from my mother. And she's very clear that for many of us, we had mothers that were physically present, but psychologically and emotionally absent. And I thought a woman in my community just nailed what this feels like so well on a recent call. She said, I'm realizing what I need is attunement, not analysis. Ooh, let that one land. Big shout out to you, babe. I know you're listening. That phrase has just been guiding me lately. It's honestly been helping me clean up a lot of like my own parenting, or even in my, connections with my partner, like, whoa, wait. Am I analyzing or am I attuning? This also made me think of another woman that shared in our community on one of the calls how her parents would tell her, like, whenever she'd bring up a feeling or that she was struggling, her parents would be like, go pray about it. Let me be clear. That is not nurturance. Many of that is not a loving relationship. And that goes back to the whole, many of us may think we had loving relationships with our mothers, and we may not fully understand what the nurturing was that we actually needed. She goes on to share the other 2 that she talks about, which are we need protection from our mothers. We also need guidance. I'm not going to go into all of those in this episode, but what I'm hoping you pull from me sharing those 6 points, and what I've really been understanding as I've been starting to read this book, is that, holy shit, my loves, if you have this deep mother hunger in you, something that got formed when you were, under the age of from, birth to 3, and she even talks about it being even when you're in utero, in memories that you might not even have explicit access to or language around. If that is the case for you, not only will the process of making this decision of whether you want to stay or go be so much more deep and multi-layered in a different way from other women that might be in like a very similar marriage, but are doing it with more secure attachment, okay? But ultimately, for you, deciding whether to stay or go is one of the most vitally important decisions you will ever make for your personal well-being and healing. And that is because without this work, around secure attachment, the largest predictor of human health and happiness, which is loving relationships, that is incredibly difficult without secure attachment. And thus, you making this decision on whether to stay in your marriage or not is vitally important. Let that be one of the biggest things you take from this episode. It is so important, not just in a what's it going to happen to my kids, what's going to happen to our lives, but in a very, very deeply like human health, happiness, personal predictor of what your life is going to be like way. With that point driven home again, I now want to dive deeper in the rest of the episode into what I've been really like digesting and putting together after reading all of this. So those 6 points come directly from Kelly McDaniel, but my brain in reading those and hearing all of this, as my beautiful ADHD brain loves to do, it goes and it seeks the patterns. It takes new input and it starts going, let me apply this. Let me apply this across everything I've seen and everything I've learned and everybody I've coached. What do I see? So one of the things I see straight out the gate is that the process for those of us that are falling into the 40 to 50% that have insecure attachment from our childhood with, emotionally immature parents, our process is going to be a different route than those with secure attachment. And that's important to know because we're often talking to other women going through divorce or considering it, and we may be comparing ourselves, right? Wow, she really seemed to be able to do that more quickly than me. It's taken me years. I'm thinking of a client that I just adore, who I know has deep insecure attachment wounds from childhood, and it has taken her years. She is currently still in her marriage. And every time she comes to me with that shame of like, why am I still in this? I'm like, I see you. The work you are doing is so much deeper. The task you've been allotted by life is just, it's a deep and difficult task in a way that is different for those of us with secure attachment. So one of the first things I thought of was like, those of us that have insecure attachment, we need to know that. We need to own that. And we got to stop comparing ourselves to other women that may have more secure attachment than us. And as I hinted at, I think a little bit earlier, I think this is what blindsides so many women that get divorced and then decades later say they regret it. And I was like, oh, like this is why I emphasize on this podcast that it is not just about the marriage. For some of you, getting divorced is not going to fix any of this secure attachment piece. I mean, for me, getting divorced helped move me into safer environments where I could begin that work, but it didn't just automatically give me secure attachment. That was work that I see, sometimes I'll talk about it with my women that I coach of like, that's work that's firmly in my lane. Okay? Even if I leave the dynamic of the marriage, I still have that work in my lane. And this segues beautifully into the next point I had coming out of all of this, which was if we don't realize we have insecure attachment and this is the work that's going to be in our lane, okay? I see many of us that have insecure attachment, we fall into this trap that was illustrated so beautifully recently by one of my women in the community, where on a recent call, she was sharing about how what's kept her in her marriage and kind of kept her, I would say, treading water for so long is getting caught up in these ideas, these big, grand ideas of being one in your marriage, and that if you're enlightened and like close to God, you're able to love your partner through their struggles and you're able to see their pain and be there for them through it, no matter what. Like all of these grand, huge, expansive ideas that we have around marriage through health, through sickness, the promises that we make. Oh, let me be very, very real with all of you on this episode right now. Those of us without secure attachment from our childhoods, we cannot be saviors. We are humans. That is what is happening in that moment. Is you are getting caught up in this idea of being almost like superhuman. That's why I use the word savior, and not being grounded and honest about what is actually real, the childhood we came from, the work that is in our lane, regardless of what's going on. in the marriage. And as much as we might be tempted by these healing fantasies that one day we will be enough for this person that we're married to, and one day, through our love, they will heal through their traumas too, and then together we will heal together. I'm going to be so real with y'all on this episode right now. I know from personal experience and having watched it now for multiple years of coaching in story after story of women that come to me, that if there is enough insecure attachment within each partner in the marriage, it does not magically a securely attached marriage make, nor an environment where individual partners can heal into secure attachment. And I would say, I'm just going to expand this statement out to all my girlies in the affair department as well. An affair dynamic with a partner who is also in secure attachment does not magically in fairy tale Disney fantasy land end up with a securely attached relationship. It doesn't. I've been wanting to say this on the episode so badly for so long. It's been something I've been watching and tracking for a while where I'm like, man, I haven't seen it yet. And I have seen women try. I have got a first row seat to women coming to me and telling me about everything they have possibly done to change themselves and to make marriage work. But at some point, babes, you have to be honest with yourself about what you can actually humanly carry. If you are a human that comes from a severe enough level of your own trauma and lack of care and nurturing that has created insecure attachment, in my opinion, I'll be very clear, I'm sharing my opinions based off of what I've seen in the work I've done. It is an absolute fantasy to believe that somehow if you heal enough and become, I'm going to air quote this, not you, if I just become enough of not me, if I can just heal enough that I'm not me, that you will somehow be able to make your marriage work. And this is, I see this is a strong theme in religion, right? Strong theme that somehow if we just become enough, this thing outside of our control will change. In fact, that same woman that I was just talking about, wanting to love her partner through his struggles and seeing his pain, she comes from a heavy religious background. And she shared that her brain was like, if I just become more healed or more enlightened, then maybe I won't be so unhappy in my marriage and I'll be able to love my partner more. I absolutely could go find in my journals from before I got divorced. I remember I was reading them earlier this year and pointing it out to Joe. I was like, holy shit, before I start going to therapy, consistent themes in my journal of why am I struggling? Why am I not more? If I could just surrender more, if God could just help me more, if I could just love my husband more, all of this would get better. Ooh, loves. What I have seen over and over, especially if the trauma is severe enough, is that it has to be two people, first acknowledging their trauma, and two, getting outside support from securely attached support people for this to work. And that's what I mean by if your dynamic in the marriage is just you came from trauma, he came from trauma, you can see that you're both insecurely attached, I would go so far as to say we are not going to make a ton of headway in the marriage until you both have, like I just said, a securely attached support person outside of the marriage to help you start healing up into more secure attachment with yourself. And both of you need to be doing that work. Unfortunately, what I see most often is a lot of you, the women listening to the podcast, are doing this work. You are trying to heal into secure attachment, and you are being met by partners stuck in insecure attachment, unwilling to acknowledge their trauma, and wanting you to be their secure attachment person. And the thing about that drives me crazy is when you are an insecurely attached person trying to heal into secure attachment, and you are partnered with an insecure attachment who is not, it is like two people drowning and you are trying to get out of the water and they are clinging on to you and dragging you back down. This was the guy I dated for a year, 3 years post-divorce. When I dated him for a year, oh my God, did he tank my mental health and secure attachment to myself because he was not doing his own work. That is the risk of staying with an individual who is not doing their own work. I want to drive this point home even further by talking about boundaries. We did a boundaries workshop actually in the community a couple of weeks ago, which, side note, it is absolutely available in our extra resources. So go join the community to get access to it. If you're like, boundaries, I would really love some more work around that. Go head over to the community. That's where it's at. You can totally text Stay or Go Community to 33777. It'll take you right there. But as we're doing this workshop, I was noticing that for some of the women, it was pretty tough to realize how much in their marriage, and I would even extend it, if you're in a relationship, even noticing how much boundaries were being violated within that dynamic. And we so get caught in this idea that we can live without boundaries, that we can let those boundary violations happen without there being a cost. That's, I believe, one of the biggest lies that patriarchy sells to women of just let all your boundaries be violated, pour everything out of your cup, and you'll be able to do that indefinitely. But let me say once again, there is a very real cost to yourself when you do this. Going back to that idea of sacrificing yourself to be a savior for your partner and your marriage, it sounds really pretty on paper to give just so all-encompassingly, not holding anything back. But in practice, it is a mental, emotional, and physical health nightmare for the women living it. And I know this because these are the women I'm talking to. These are the women I meet in the community. These are the women that get on 90 Minutes with me. These are the women I work with in my deep dive one-on-one. They are women who really thought, I have an unlimited resource here. I can do this. And usually by the time you come find me, you're realizing, I have hit a wall. This is not working. So then, right, if it's not working, why do we keep doing it, y'all? Right? I know so many of you are like, I know it's not working, but why do I keep doing it? So this ties back into the book. For those of us with emotionally immature parents, I want to be clear. This is not your fault. It's understanding that not having boundaries was what was literally demanded of us in childhood. And for some of us, that demand, was made implicitly, right? It's just something, it was never said, but you knew, I'm not allowed to make mistakes. I'm not allowed to have other opinions. I'm not allowed all these things that would be healthy for me, or it was communicated explicitly. But what happened, regardless, whether implicit or explicit, is that deep, probably unconscious, I don't think you realize how much, always makes me think of that image. Y'all, go look up how much of your brain is actually conscious and unconscious. It will scare you. But deep unconscious parts of yourselves learned. They learned that. They learned in your dynamic with your parents that boundaries, that letting your boundaries be violated was absolutely essential. They knew it then, And they still know it for some of you in your marriages today. If you are with a partner that needs your boundaries to be violated for them to get what they need, that's going to trigger that exact same thing from your childhood. And it's going to trigger a pattern of you continuing to hang in there, hoping that one day the amount that you are giving will be reciprocal, that your pain and fatigue will eventually be acknowledged. And that's not how it works. Seen that over and over and over again. It's so much deeper than someone just finally realizing and acknowledging your pain, which is the case for many of you, right? I'm working with quite a few of you right now in the community who have husbands who all of a sudden are like, oh no, you're divorcing me. Well, now I'm going to change. And they're trying to fix things on the surface. But you're realizing, oh, the level of the change that's needed, the awareness is so much deeper than, here, let me just do the dishes, or let me brush the kids' teeth, or now I'm going to do the laundry. It's much, much deeper than that. Now, I want to come back to that same woman who talked about, if I can just be healed enough, if I can just be enlightened enough. And by the way, when it comes to like that word, if I'm healed enough or enlightened enough, feel free to supplement that with whatever your enough is. Yours might be if I'm unselfish enough, if I was just grateful enough, if I was just tough enough, my marriage would get better, things would be better, whatever the word is that you're using for this scenario. But I was so proud. That same woman, after we did our boundaries workshop, she was able to get on one of our calls and share with us that after, having some kind of tough love on the boundaries call, realizing, oh, actually where I am at, and it was so beautiful when she said it on this call, she said, I am tired of living in this dynamic. And actually, my marriage is re-traumatizing and playing on my childhood trauma constantly. And then on the call, I had to stop myself from squealing because I just watched her unpack it and coach herself. And she shared, she put together all of these pieces I've just been outlining for you all. She realized, the person I am, most attached to, the person I am married to, is in pain over me stopping, trying to set these boundaries, pulling back from the over caretaking, trying to take care of myself, trying to unenmesh from this dynamic. And the reason he is in pain, he keeps projecting onto it being me. And that's the same dynamic I learned in childhood with my parent, that I looked at and thought, they're in pain, it must be because of me. And once she put together that link, she realized, oh, wow, in these moments when I'm completely losing myself around the idea of getting divorced, when I'm moving into just absolute abject terror and I'm feeling all of this shame and self-hatred, as I shared with you guys at the beginning of this episode, right? That's not actually my reality. That's me getting hijacked back into the CPTSD emotional flashback of my childhood. And that's a really important thing to know, that the person I am with, because of their insecure attachment and what they need from me, it's just creating this dynamic that, in her words, I think she just said them so well, it's re-traumatizing and playing on my childhood trauma constantly. I know how exhausting that is, how absolutely draining that is. And I could see the light bulb go on for her of oh, wait a second. When I go into this panic that I'm not going to be able to make it if I leave, and I'm not going to survive, and I'm not going to be strong enough, that's not actually adult me. This is not actually rooted in who I am, but rather it's that learned response from my childhood. It is her mother hunger. It is what came up for me when I sat down on the couch in my therapist's office and just completely, I was so obliterated in that moment with unending hopelessness, helplessness, fear. It doesn't actually come from that situation. It comes from how I felt in childhood. And when you start to see it clearly, like she was, you can come back to what I hope so many of you find in the podcast and the way I like to coach, which is more of the neutrality of just looking at the data and going, okay, not only is my marriage not actually working, the relationship isn't working, but it has become a literal proxy for my childhood. And if I am stuck in a never-ending loop where my partner's pain is always my fault, where I have to suppress my boundaries just to keep the peace, I would offer, if you resonate to that, your marriage is actively exacerbating and worsening that original mother hunger. That is why, after 12 years of marriage for me, I was at the lowest low of secure attachment and loving myself I could potentially be at. And I thankfully, through the therapy I did in the 2.5 years before I decided to get divorced, was able to heal up enough, recover enough of that secure attachment to realize, oh, this environment just isn't what I need. And that is probably what breaks my heart the most for the women I meet who come from backgrounds where we don't understand our childhood trauma, where the pain of the mother hunger is not acknowledged or understood, is that when that is the case for you, and then you add that into living in a patriarchal society where women are culturally put on pedestals and we are expected to have endless reserves of love to heal and tend and care for all the children and husbands and people in the world. Brilliant, beautiful women like myself, under-resourced women, what we do is we end up internalizing the blame and hating ourselves the most while we are in marriages where we are simultaneously over-functioning and hyper-vigilant to everyone else's needs and subconsciously drowning in our own unmet needs that stretch all the way back to our childhoods. I hope you guys stayed with me through that little part of me tracking through that because this is why I get on and record episodes. This is why I coach. Because I know what it feels like to be that kind of a woman. A woman, like I said, over-functioning, hyper-vigilant, taking care of everybody else, and at the same time internalizing all of this blame and self-hatred because why is it not working? Why is it not working? While completely not understanding and drowning in your unmet needs from childhood. And I know I'm not alone in this because multiple women on our call a week ago shared similar feelings. Some of the words that they shared were I feel frazzled. I feel burnt out. They talked about always taking on the emotional labor in the marriage. I'm seeing more and more dynamics where both people in the marriage are working, but the woman is still doing all of the childcare and the emotional care of the family. And I'm seeing them talking about how their needs are not considered at all, or if they are considered, they are always expected to come last. And as you know, if you listened to my most recent episodes on the creation of patriarchy, I hope many of you now understand that the broken systems we live in depend on this sacrifice from women to keep going. They have for as long as patriarchy has been the prevailing mode by which we organize ourselves and the world. And so when we understand that, it's like, I love this. Those episodes were like the big macrocosm. This episode is where we come down into the microcosm, the personal injuries that are experienced by us in systems like this. It is only once women, and I'm speaking directly to you, if you are one of my listeners that falls in this category, that has thought you are the problem. It is only once you stop believing you are the problem, and from there, stop continuing to make those sacrifices, to live in a fantasy land of, I'm a savior, I'm not human, I can just give and give and give and give, and there will be an endless supply here. But instead go, nope, I'm a human, and you get real about where you've come from and what's the work that lies in your lane. When women start doing that, those systems, I truly believe, will have to change. And that's another part of this episode here at the end that I really want to help you all see, because because those systems will continue to be propped up unknowingly. The very systems that are like cannibalizing and eating us as women are the systems that we are unknowingly propping up when we continue to believe we are the problem and that we need to endlessly be fixing ourselves so that someday, one day, we can be superhuman and be able to function off of zero care while tending to everyone else. That is not the goal. And a huge first step of being able to find a different life is letting that goal and that dream die into the reality that you are a human. Now, it's one thing to say, stop making those sacrifices, right? But I want to be so clear that I absolutely get it, how hard that is. It is terrifying for many of us to leave those systems. And I hear this the most from like a lot of women who are asking me, how do I leave when I can't trust myself? And I'm like, yes, I get it. This is the like chicken and egg thing that I think so many of us get into, because how can I leave when at the moment the marriage I'm in is the very thing that's been like feeding or driving like more of this insecure attachment? And so I'm like currently very insecurely attached to myself. And it actually feels terrifying to step out on my own and bet on myself. And as we know, not only do we feel that personally, but I would say with good reason, when we look historically and even presently, women who step out of those bounds can face immense psychological, financial, and cultural pushback. And when your baseline from infancy tells you that mistakes are fatal, as mine does, and that you are only safe if you are pleasing someone else, the process of deciding whether to stay or go is going to hit you at an existential level of terror that people with secure attachment simply do not understand. So it's important, here I'm like, okay, if patriarchy is going to change, we as women have to stop making these sacrifices and, believing that we can be superhuman. We have to let that goal go. We have to ground back into being human. But then when we realize we're human, we don't have secure attachment. So what do we do next? What do we need? We need to realize that we cannot do this alone. And we need securely attached women that we can heal with, that nurture us, that protect us and guide us. I ultimately believe, and where I have found the most, I would say, healing in my secure attachment is through sisterhood. I believe we need community with other women that can mother us. I've realized it's been very touching this year to realize that's in a huge, huge, huge way what my therapist this year has been doing. She has been mothering me in her own way of holding, nurturing, protective space and guiding me. And we need other women that can see us and love us and believe in us in the ways that for so many of us, our own mothers and grandmothers just couldn't. And when it comes to selecting the level of care, the depth of the connection that we're going to need, it's important to check in with the degree of insecure attachment that we might be experiencing. Because I am now learning in a much deeper way as I look over my offerings. I'm like, oh, I've watched women come in to the online community and be able to do their work there. I've seen women have a potent 90-minute get unstuck and empowered session where they get to like drop in, be seen by me, and then walk away with a roadmap that's going to point them down the path for the DIY work ahead. And that's enough for them. But for those of us in the heavy mother hunger camp that you guys know I am in too, I know now, I have seen clearly that acute, dedicated, and personal one-on-one support is really unparalleled for us. It's so needed. And I'm really grateful too that I get to kind of say that clearly here on the podcast, because I'm realizing more so, if we don't know the level of the mother hunger we have, then yeah, we may get into a community or do a 90-minute and think, oh, that's enough. And then be like, why am I still struggling? And it could be, oh, because the level of insecure attachment you have actually requires one-on-one support. And in fact, on next week's episode, I'm really excited. I literally feel like I have seen this work, the work of like what one-on-one can do. I've watched it all through my one-on-one coaching, but this last year I had the opportunity to coach a woman in my one-on-one deep dive container just this last fall of 2025, whose journey just epitomized for me how much this work can literally shift worlds in such a powerful and amazing way. And it showed me how much having a secure, for some of us that really need this, having a secure attachment guide and coach by your side while you make this decision can help you spread your wings and continue learning how to soar as you come through the other side. Now, I want to be clear, like that was not the case for me, y'all. That's not the journey I had. I got to do the process really mine was more like a patchwork quilt. I've had a lot of different techniques that I've found and understood and tried that I've steadily pieced together. That's just how my journey unfolded. But I'm getting to see now how, wow, when you have somebody that really believes in you, loves you, sees you, and can just provide, like I said, that launching pad out, that foundation then continues to serve you through all the pieces ahead. And ultimately, what all of this comes back to is, and she says this, Kelly McDaniel says this in the book, and I agree with it, that at the heart of all of this, every single one of us, I truly believe, deserved to be loved and adored and nurtured by our mothers. And the reality of the systems we live in is that for many of us, that wasn't the case. And reality is we are living with the daily repercussions of that right now in our daily lives. And although that might sound just like, fuck, right? Here's what I want to say. Oh, thank goodness for neuroplasticity and for knowing that this doesn't have to be lifelong. I want to say clearly, there are changes that we can make and support we can receive that can help our brains and bodies relearn how to feel safe. I say that not from theory. I speak that from lived experience. I know that firsthand. I have walked that path. I understand more now than I ever have before the level of deep, deep, deep mother hunger I have. And boy, do I just feel immensely lucky and grateful that where my path led me is out into this place of receiving the help and the support to heal my brain and my body into relearning how to feel safe. Because feeling safe and loving myself is the foundation. I now see it. It's the foundation of where everything else in my life builds from. I want to finish off this episode, which I have just loved, by the way, y'all. This was another long one, but it's just because it had so many pieces that I've been wanting to talk about on the podcast for a while that finally coalesced and came together while reading this book. But I want to finish with this thought, and I want to be clear that it might be a tough thought to hear. I know it was for me this, last week while I was at my therapist with my childhood abandonment coming up and my mother hunger roaring and this feeling of I want somebody to fix it and rescue me. But ultimately, this thought in a very important way, if we'll let it, even though it's hard to hear it for those of us with insecure attachment, it is also very freeing. So it is this. There is no one coming to rescue us from our lives, and we can't go back and be raised again by different parents. But there are women that are doing this work of healing and have gone before that have hands outstretched to pull us forward into their warm embrace. The more I learn about patriarchy, the more I have let go of kind of my maybe more naive ideas that it will magically change from men realizing the error of their ways and reallocating power. No, that world has benefited far too long from those sacrifices from women propping all of that up. But as I've been letting that story crumble, a new one has been taking its place. And it's a story where there is this beautiful linking that happens whenever one woman decides to take the journey of reaching out and grabbing those outstretched hands of the women that have walked the path before her. And through that, relearning how to love herself. And through relearning how to love herself, perhaps stepping out of relationships that calculation-wise just cannot be a safe place to heal. Once she does that, from there, she expands her impact out into the world so that she then becomes the link reaching backwards, where she too has the resources and reclaimed power to then put her outstretched hands back and help another woman step forward. That is really the life that I have come to embody. That is what I have witnessed through my own journey, the power of becoming a link in this process. And, I'm speaking specifically to women's hands that are outstretched, but I am so grateful and appreciative. I have an incredible example in my own life of a man doing that work as well. So let me be clear. It is wonderful and amazing when you get to heal with men as well doing this work. I've found at the moment, I think because of our power structures and the patriarchy, that the majority of this work for me has had to be done with women. And so that's what I'm choosing to focus on here. And to really also hopefully light that fire and catch that vision for those of you listening, because That's what I want for the women that end up working with me, especially the women that come in and do the deep dive one-on-one coaching with me. I want them to come out of that not just making the decision of whether they're going to stay or go, but to really make it moving forward into a life where they have strong enough wings to really continue soaring afterwards, to have foundational tools and knowledge that not only allow them to make an ascent and an expansion into a life they most love, but to along that journey also have the resources to reach back and bring other women along with them. That I'm thinking specifically, I'm like, that is part of the story that you guys are going to get to hear next week on the beautiful interview with my guest. She's really done that in her process, and it's very inspiring to me. It's really the only answer I have right now, y'all, for how we heal insecure attachment. Unfortunately, for many of us, because of the dynamics of patriarchy, it's very difficult to do that in marriages where we may have an insecurely attached partner as well, that's dealing with their own trauma. And so I look to us as women. I've seen incredible women do this work. I see women doing it every day in my community. And that's the dream that inspires me, that gives me hope for the world. For those of you that feel inspired by that dream as well, maybe some part of your soul calls goes, yeah, that's me too. I want you to scroll down to the show notes at the end of this episode. Go click over on my deep dive one-on-one coaching. Read up on the updated details there and sign up for an alignment and clarity call to see if we're a fit for this deep work. And even if I am not the fit for you, what this episode the heart of this episode is just understanding to give yourself support, much, much deeper support. If you are one of my babes falling in the anxious, avoidant, disorganized attachment, you are worth it. You deserve to be loved by someone who is securely attached that can hold that space for you, whether that is a therapist, whether that is a coach. I'm very grateful now that through all those therapists and coaches that held space for me, I get to experience that with my partner. It's definitely something that was a deep, deep soul desire of mine. And I now get to experience that, and it's hugely healing. I'm very excited to get to read more of Kelly McDaniel's book and see what her strategies and insights will be. Like I said, I haven't even gotten to the second half where she talks about how we actually heal around it, but I'll be looking forward to that because just like all of you, I am also in my own very human process as well. All right, babes, that's what I've got for you today. Till next week, sending you all so much love. So much love. This episode. Which just reminded me, quick piece. If you're my babes over on Substack, would love to hear your comments on this. I would love feedback on how this landed. This episode was just something that I've wanted to say for a long time. So reach out to me over there. Would love to hear back. And if you're not over on Substack, but maybe haven't left a review, but this episode really touched you, I would love for you to go review the episode, maybe drop a comment or even share this episode with another woman that you love that may also have insecure attachment and not know it. Till next week, babes.